Recorded. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everybody. This is Brian here, and it sounds like somebody was getting beaten up in their room. I'm not sure what the noise is, but this is Brian Steffen. We're here with Module 3 chat for Mass Comm, Introduction to Multimedia Communication. We're talking about media effects or mass communication effects. Hope you're all here. I've got written down, by the way, if your name, if I don't call it your name, shout it out because I want to make sure you get credit. Emily's here, Bryce is here, Hattie is here, Emmeline is here, Joshua is here, Shara is here, Braden is here. Am I missing somebody? Did you not hear your name? Okay, then I guess you're not there. This is Brian, and we're going to talk about media effects tonight. So hopefully you're all set. Here is, as we usually start, we're starting with our kind of what's coming up next in the class. We're toward the tail end of Module 3 now. You should have completed all your modules by last night, and most of you had. Tonight, obviously, is our latest Zoom chat for the 11th of September. And then, of course, if you have not yet, and most of you have not yet taken your mini exam, you need to do so by tomorrow night at 11:59. I would also point out that then we move right away into Module 4, which is on the media business. And you should complete all of your materials by this coming Sunday night at midnight. Our next chat, our next scheduled live chat is going to be Monday night, the 16th of September at 8 p.m. So if you can join us, please join us at that time. And then, of course, for Module 4, the mini exam is by next Tuesday night. So then we move on to Module 5, and the information is there, but I'm not going to talk a lot about that tonight. So I would point out, however, when we get through Module 5, we will actually be halfway through Term 1 of this course. So it moves pretty quickly. So, there I put a circle on Monday, September 16th to remind you of our next live chat at Zoom. So tonight we're talking about Module 3, and we've got a number of objectives. We want to talk about the history and the understanding of media effects. We have a lot of concern that heavy consumption of media has most frequently a negative effect on us. But why do we think that? Why do we not worry about the effects of school or the effects of any other institution on us the way we worry about the effects of media? So we're going to talk about the distinction between the critical cultural theory model of media effects and what's known as the effects model. One of the things we'll find out is that in Europe, the critical cultural theory is very popular among academics and intellectuals. In America, the effects module is very popular. So we're going to talk about 4 kinds of effects that mass media can have. We're going to talk about 8 major significant theories of mass communication and how they impact people and how we use them to understand how media have an impact on our life. And then we're going to talk specifically, we're going to do a deep dive on what's called the mean world syndrome and how that is one way of explaining the impact of consuming large amounts of media. And particularly violent media on people. You will remember, I hope, for those who were here the other night, that because the Nielsen organization says that we consume 10 plus hours of media per day, which when you think about it, we're only awake for 16 hours or so. And so about 70% of every waking hour of the day is spent with media. Well, if that's violent media, maybe that does have a significant impact on how you see the world and how you react to it. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. So a total of 5 objectives for the night. Does anyone have any questions on where we are now, where we're going, or the objectives for the night? Good. I mean, I keep having, so far in the first 2 modules, at least 1 or 2 people who aren't taking the mini exams. And I always want to make sure that people understand those deadlines. That's why I ask these questions and maybe have an uncomfortable pause or so during it. So anyway, if you're all good, I guess I would point out, obviously, you're going to get this material from Ralph Hanson's book, the chapter 2 that you read for tonight, as well as you watched a number of videos involving Jay Smooth, the rapper and social advocate. And maybe by the time we're done here later in October, you're going to be sick of Jay Smooth. But he does, in my view, a really good job of explaining a lot of this. So for those of you who are in the room for the first time, this is probably the last time I'm going to talk about our basic rule of Zoom chats, is that always identify yourself at name when you chime in. This is not like a classroom situation where we can see you and we know the sound of your voice, so we know that's Joe back there in the corner. A lot of times you're just appearing in a little video square up in the upper corner of the screen. So please, the first time you speak tonight, make sure you say something like, "Hi, Brian Steffen here, first name, last name. One thing I got out of the reading tonight is," and fill in the blank. After that, just say, "Hey, Brian here. Braden made a great comment when he said blah." So that is just a good kind of visual grammar for online learning that helps us follow along better. As I've said before, and I'm going to say it again, my goal in an online class is to do our best to make this a conversation among each other rather than a lecture between one person in one place and tonight 7 or 8 different people in distinct locations who never of whom meet each other or talk to each other or even acknowledge each other are alive. So that's really the function of what we're trying to do here. So anyway, Module 3 is all about mass communication effects. And I guess before I go on, who wants to just tell me about a way mass communication has had an effect on you, your life, the way you live, the way you think, without regard to any theories or anything like that? Just you just freely admit media have a major impact on you.
Braden.
Hey, Braden.
I think one of the main things is that the amount of things you can see that just aren't stuck in a small hometown community. I think the amount of things we can learn from different places these days is substantially increased from the beginning of mass media.
So, Braden, are you saying that one of the things that mass media, mass communication does is it broadens your perspective of the world? If Braden had lived years ago, you might know your hometown and the immediate environments, but now you can literally consume the whole world?
Yeah, if you choose to, I guess.
Right.
Some people still have that kind of narrow-mindedness, but I think you can.
Absolutely. But I mean, it's regardless of how narrow-minded you are, it's absolutely impossible to not know something about what's going on in the rest of the world and to actually watch it.
Yeah.
And to feel it. So I think that's a good point, Braden. Who else has a good take on this? How has media had an impact on you, your life, your thinking, your actions?
Personally, oh, sorry, this is Shira.
This is Shara, by the way.
Personally, I feel like it sometimes can give me more anxiety because, sometimes the stories that come out, they really only come out just to basically hype you up or to make you feel like something bad is going to happen or whatever the case is until you actually research it, and it's really not what they're making it seem. So if you're into it and you're prone to believe things, you can have more anxiety because of it.
So if Shara, if you're looking at the image I have on the screen right now, which is somebody burying their head in their hands surrounded by social media, which by the way is supposed to make us happy, but we know from the research a lot of times it makes us very sad and anxious. Is that what you're talking about? That, what you see in media can actually create anxieties in you?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And do you think media organizations, media personnel do that purposefully? Do they think they want
Of course.
you to feel bad?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it depends on what it is, but everything that is put out in media, there's a point to it. Like you're supposed to feel sad, happy, whatever the case is. So I would think that they're intentionally doing that.
Why would they do that? Why would they want you to feel bad? I don't want you to feel bad. I mean, I don't think anyone in this room would want anyone else to feel bad. Why would we do that to you?
I don't know.
Why would anyone got an idea? I think she's got a point that media frequently make us feel too fat, too ugly, too lonely, too big, too slow, too clumsy, too unlovable, not a good enough parent, you name it. Why would they do that?
Hey, this is Josh Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in general it sells better. Like it gets more views, it gets more clicks when something is maybe shocking or offensive or like, oh my gosh, what? Like, I'm fat or I'm, or whatever, like, whatever it is. Just if there's more like, I think I was watching a video by some guy who used to work for Google, and he was saying that like 17% more retweets will happen per word of like hate or destroys or something like that, or these extreme words. So that's, I don't know, that's just kind of how we are as people.
Absolutely. So we've talked about Josh, you're absolutely right. The marketing model of media, which is basically that the way media are set up is to really sell things to you overwhelmingly. There are some exceptions, public television as an example. But, one of the functions is selling advertising. And if you feel real good about yourself, like, oh, maybe I'm a little overweight, but I'm fine. I'm a good parent. I'm a really good partner to the person in my life, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you feel like you're perfectly fine the way you are, why the hell would you buy anything that they're advertising? You wouldn't, right? So you're convinced you're too fat, so you do a weight loss plan. You're convinced you're not in good enough shape, so you buy new Nikes or new athleisure wear. You're convinced you're not a good enough parent, so you put your kid in a new kind of daycare or whatever the case may be. So yes, that's an impact of media. One of the functions of media is not purposefully to make you feel bad about yourself, but if everybody felt good about themselves, who would buy all the crap that they sell in the world? I wouldn't. So that's something. Let's hear one more. What's one more kind of sense that media have an impact on what people think and what people do and how they behave and act?
This is Bryce. And I think kind of going off the points we've already said, like the ease of access we have, so we can have all different kinds of media just in our hand on our smartphone. So
Right.
the ease of access is really quick. So, I mean, we get the latest story right away and things like that.
Right. Good example, Bryce. I'm glad you brought that up. I had class until 12:30 today on campus, and then I had to scoot off from McNeil Hall to the Kent Campus Center for a faculty meeting. So I had to get up there pretty quickly. And I'm walking out of McNeil Hall, and I was looking at my phone as I was walking out the door, and then I thought for a second I'd left something back in the classroom. So I stopped and I turned, and I saw like 6 students in a row coming out of the door of McNeil Hall. And honest to goodness, every single one of them was staring and thumbing through a phone, through a device. They were consuming media as soon as they got out of the classroom. So clearly there's an impact on us. When people say, oh, it's got no impact on me, they're usually saying it while they're like thumbing through text messages or Facebook posts, right? Now, has no impact on me at all. But, if we were to transport ourselves back in time from 2019 to 1919 or 1819, before these little handheld devices were even imagined, you would find that people live completely different lives. And so, yeah, that's a good one. The fact is media do have effects on us. What we're trying to do is figure out what those effects are. And so the first objective here is to understand the development in our understanding of media effects. And the first part of your reading for tonight dealt with significant changes, particularly in Western cultures, that took place, basically in the last 220 years, from the year 1800 until today, 2019 and almost 2020. And, most of us have no idea who our ancestors were who lived 200 years ago. But the fact is they lived completely different lives than we did. How so? How was life in 1820 different than it will be next spring in 2020? In what significant way? Other than, of course, we have devices we're staring at all the time. But fundamentally, how was life different? Emmeline, Shirley, you had to be thinking about this a little bit. You flew, 8 or 10 hours from Hawaii back to here.
Uh-huh.
You think in 1820 anyone could ever dream of flying from Honolulu all the way back to Des Moines in 8 or 10 hours?
No.
That's a mind blower. Don't you think, in a certain way?
Yeah.
So if Emmeline's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma could be brought into our Zoom chat tonight, what do you think her life would be like?
She would probably be living in a community with people who are like her. And those are the people that they talk to, and those are the people that they share their stories with instead of posting them on Facebook and everything else that we do.
So how would we define community in 1820 for your great-great-great-great-great whatever grandma? How would we define the community she lived in?
I would assume that it would be mostly family.
Mostly family or people who lived very close by, right? I don't know. Do you know where your quote unquote where your people came from? Did they come from Germany?
From Poland, and then I'm not quite sure where my mom's side is from.
Okay, so Emmeline's 8-9 generations ago, grandma is probably living in a farm village in Poland, right?
Probably.
Yeah, and her life is she was born. She was probably married by age 16 or 17. She was probably having babies shortly after that. She might have had 7 or 8 babies. Those babies grew up and had their own babies. Eventually, a couple of generations later, they might have come to the United States. And then your grandma, I hate to say this, and correct me if you know your family history and you know it to be different, but your grandma probably would have died at the age of 45 or 50.
Right.
It's kind of dark, isn't it? But it was, I bet if we could bring grandma back now, she'd say, oh, that was all good. That's how people had lived.
Right. Well,
right?
There wasn't anything different. That was
Right. They lived in local communities from which they would only travel a few miles in their entire lifetime. They would probably live on the land or off of some menial labor of some kind. They would probably marry the first boy they ever met. They would get married very young. They would have, a large number of children, some of whom would not live to adulthood. And then they would die fairly young. And that's a completely different life than what you live in. You live in a life where, if you were able to tell your 8 generations ago grandma, I got on what was it, last Thursday you left for Hawaii?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got on an airplane and flew halfway around the world to Hawaii. I played volleyball for 3 days. I spent a day on the beach, and then I flew all the way halfway back around the world, and I was back in class on Tuesday. Your grandma would go, what the what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my question is this, and not to pick on you, Emmeline, but to go on to anyone else. Just simply the ability to do that. Does that change the way you think about your world?
Yeah, and personally, my family focuses on traveling a lot, so I don't really realize that not everyone travels like I do, and just the ease of traveling and getting on a plane for me and just going through the whole airport process. Like, there are still people today that just isn't their norm.
Right.
So I guess that's still a thing
Right,
today. Just
yeah, absolutely. Right. You go through, you check in, you go through TSA, you get on the, you get a bottle of water to take with you on the plane, you get flying, you change planes somewhere, you fly halfway, around the world, you get a meal on the plane, you're watching a movie, everything's cool. You get to where you're going. Maybe you're a little jet lagged, which is something that people 200 years ago never had to worry about.
right.
My point is this, ladies and gentlemen, my point is this. That world that Emmeline's, 8 generations ago grandma lived in was a real simple world compared to ours. And it was a world in which your entire realm of experience was your family, the land you lived on, the community you lived in, the church you attended, and you really didn't pay much attention to anything else that went beyond your immediate experience. You might not know how to read. You might not know how to talk about issues with someone. And the fact is that was a completely different life than what we live today. Anyone have any idea when that began to change in the Western world, that we ceased being kind of an agricultural, land-based, multiple generations of the same people living in the same community on the same land, to started to shift to what we know today? Anyone know when that would have happened?
This is Hattie. I thought it was during the Industrial Revolution when people started moving into cities, and then there was different groups mixing.
Absolutely. So we moved from 200 years ago from being an overwhelmingly agricultural social organization to, by the late 19th century in the United States particularly, being overwhelmingly industrial, so that people were leaving the farms, they were moving to the cities, they were taking jobs in factories, they were living in huge cities, no longer that community of 100 or 200, but maybe New York City with 3 million people, all crammed on top of each other. Does anyone understand how living in New York City in the year 1890 would be a lot different than living in, Ithaca, New York, a very nice city in upstate New York, 50 years earlier with maybe, 400 people living there? Do you understand how that would have an impact on the way people thought about the world? If you never encountered anyone who wasn't just like you, and suddenly you encountered a lot of people who weren't just like you, would that have a significant impact on the way you thought about the world?
This is Bryce. It'd be like a culture shock, I guess, for those people that have never experienced anything outside their norm.
Absolutely, it would be a culture shock. I talked to one of our first-year students this week from Denver, Colorado. And she came in and talked to me, and I said, "How's the transition going?" You want to know what she told me? She said, "It's been a huge culture shock moving to Iowa." And I went, "What?" "Oh, yeah, it's been a big culture shock." Of course, she's used to a certain life in Denver, and she's actually downsizing into Indianola, and it's a culture shock for her. The point is that at that turn of the century, going from the 1800s to the 1900s, what we saw happen was that all of those traditional institutions that drove life, family, local community, church, etc., started to fall away. And they were replaced, not by smartphones yet, but by newspapers, magazines, radio, movies. And can you see how if what has your ear on a daily basis around about the year 1900s is a lot of things that didn't have your ear 80 years or 100 years before? Do you understand why there might be some fear about what that was doing to you?
This is Braden here. What I'm thinking about is, I guess you could just kind of parallel it to the immigration problem today, where people feel like they're being displaced by new people, I guess, that they don't feel should be here. And I guess that's similar to where you live in a community and then you're suddenly blown up by a population that has different interests, different movies, different culture than you would want.
You're right, Braden. And so, one of the things we can take away from this and associate with Ralph Hanson's Ralph Hanson's 7 Secrets, there really is nothing new. I mean, we today are fearful of globalization and social change and ethnic change and cultural change, but we've always been fearful of that back 200 and some years. And the point is that around about the turn of the 20th century, 100 years ago, there was significant concern about what those new institutions of print media, broadcast media, and film were doing to people. So just let me give you one example and then we'll move on. In the 1920s, the film industry in the United States enacted something called the Hays Code, H-A-Y-S Code, which was a voluntary code by which the movie industry promised to not show certain overtly sexual things in movies. And by overtly sexual, I mean young couples kissing in the back seat of a car. I don't mean pornography. I don't mean obscenity. I don't mean internet stuff. I mean just an innocent teenage couple getting in the back of the car, enjoying each other's company, and pecks on the cheek. Because people were concerned that film had become so powerful in our country 100 years ago that if young people saw other young people on a movie screen kissing, Katie bar the door, teenage pregnancy would run rampant, the institution of marriage would be destroyed, traditional morality would be eliminated, and that's just from seeing people kiss in the back seat of a car. And we laugh at that today and say, God, what a stupid idea it was. But you have to view it in the context of the time. There had been radical and rapid social change. And the traditional ways of governing how people behaved with one another had given way to new ways. And you go 50 years later, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, Elvis in the 1950s, fathers of teenage girls everywhere made damn sure their daughters never saw Elvis because they were convinced if they saw or listened to Elvis, they would become sexually immoral, right? There's nothing more American today than Elvis, but in the 1950s, he was considered a threat to traditional values. So the point is this, because we've gone through such significant social change from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy to today an information and knowledge economy, people constantly worry about the impact of the devices that we make our life with and how they might be sending young people, not too bright people, other kinds of people astray. To the point today where when there's a mass shooting somewhere, rather than doing something about guns, the immediate responses say, well, it's just those damn video games that are making people want to kill other people. I don't know. I would bet you there's a lot of people in this chat room right now who play violent video games. I've never once thought about going out and getting an assault rifle and mowing down a room of first graders. Just a thought. So that's the reason why we have a lot of concern about media effects. It has less to do with media and really about the change of our relationships to one another. So that conversation has moved through 3 phases, from fear of media to the positing of the direct effects of media to an understanding of indirect effects of media. And most all of this happens in the early 20th century. The first thing is that we're just scared to death of media, that propaganda will take over, that media will brainwash people. Then we move to a direct effects, which is basically, if I tell the 7 or 8 of you who are in the room tonight to go jump off a cliff, there's something about the power of seeing me say that through a camera that will actually make you get up on top of your housing unit tonight and jump off and kill yourself. I don't know exactly how that works, but there are a lot of people who believe that. My dad believes that my youngest brother became a drug addict because of Led Zeppelin. I don't think he ever actually met Led Zeppelin, any member of Led Zeppelin, but my dad firmly believes that rock and roll turned my brother into a drug addict. That's not the reason he became a drug addict. And then indirect effects. That's to say, you know what, maybe media does have some effect, but it's not this kind of direct injection of messages and making people do things. So that's really it. So now we move into talking about this thing called critical theory. And so our objective here is explain how the critical/cultural theory that is influential in Europe differs from the effects model that is popular in America. Maybe we can figure out here through the conversation, why is it that one kind of understanding of the impact of media that's influential on one side of the planet differs from the other that's influential on the other? Can anyone, first of all, help us with what the critical cultural theory of media is? Shara, do you want to take a try? Do you want to take a shot at that?
Okay, so what I had written down for this is people suffer from exploitation and division labor, and they're treated as things to be used rather than individuals with value.
Well, that sounds pretty depressing. So what's that got to do with, you got any idea, or anyone have any idea of how that would have anything to do with the impact of media on how people think about and act in their world? Shara, by the way, I should add, you're right. I think you've got a good description of it, but what's that got to do with media?
Well, I think it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, with why media wants you to feel a certain way, and it's pretty much, I feel like, boils down to I don't know who said it, Bryce, or I don't know, but said it had to do with money, and it's easier for them to make you feel a certain type of way to go out and buy a certain product or to read a certain headline or whatever the case is.
Okay. I think that's good. Does anyone have another addition to that we can piggyback on that?
What I had written down was the main differences in critical theory. It looks at how people shape their view of the world from media rather than how media shapes their view.
I think that's interesting. Can you give me a specific of how that works?
So it's kind of like what we talked about last week, how a far left and a far right person can watch the same campaign ad and get two totally different things out of it.
Right.
So the media is not really constructing their opinion; they're constructing their opinion.
Oh.
Yeah.
So in other words, media are less doing things to us than we are doing things with media.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got from it.
I think that's helpful. Let's see where else we can go with that. Anyone else got an addition? Yeah.
Braden here. I'd like to add to that. I think that kind of the way that you could be scrolling through Instagram and getting very attractive people on your feed, and then having that make you feel bad, and then all of a sudden you get tips on to lose weight and tips to blah 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 blah, and then once you do all the work to lose all the weight, then all of a sudden you're getting Burger King ads and all these crazy, like, it just goes back and forth between how much money they can pull out of you based on your emotions of, should I be this? Oh, it's kind of hot to be hot these days, so why not? I think it's very polarized, and
So
I know there is no them, but
you're right.
that's what
Our media, Braden, our media corporations just really bad, power hungry, greedy people who are just screwing us over. Because we have said before that one of the functions of media is to get you to buy stuff. And maybe buy stuff that you don't necessarily want to buy or need to buy. But, you know, the advertising model is such that we present a lot of advertising. So does that mean the people, you know, kind of behind the scenes are pulling strings and trying to hoodwink you into buying stuff?
no, I think they're just appealing to your kind of anxiety or
Your
not
bias.
really knowing yourself enough.
Yeah, but it strikes me. It strikes me if I was to sit here in class, ladies and gentlemen, and make you anxious and depressed and lacking confidence in yourself, I'd be a pretty bad teacher. I'd be a bad human being, wouldn't I? You know, if you worked really hard to lose a bunch of weight and then I throw a Burger King commercial at you, wouldn't that make me a bad person?
Well, it's not on purpose. It's not like they're purposely being like, hey, this person just lost a bunch of weight, so let's go ahead and, you know, shoot them a bunch of ads for Burger King.
Right.
It's more so like it's a consistent thing. It's a constant thing that's happening. So it's like,
Right.
I feel like it kind of plays into what you already feel, what your biases already are.
Yeah.
If you feel like you want to have a burger, you're probably going to be more prone to have a burger because you just saw that commercial.
You know, if I'm a marketing research person, Shara, or anyone, I know that you really want to lose weight, you want to be fit, you want to live a healthy life, but I also know that deep down inside of you, there's something just really wants that burger, right? Mm-hmm. And I give into it. A lot of people give into it. It seems to hit me at just the right time, right?
Yep.
Now that's not hypnosis, by the way. But here's the point. The critical and cultural theory analyzes the impact of media as an institution that resides within a capitalist, specifically consumer capitalist framework. In other words, under the cultural critical theory model, what media should do is be an educational tool to help you make more sense of the world and make good choices in the world. But the critique is what media really do is say, well, you know, that's all well and good, but we need to make money. And so I'm going to sell you McDonald's. I'm going to sell you a car you can't afford. I'm going to sell you a college you can't afford. I'm going to sell you a vacation you can't afford, clothes, a lifestyle you can't afford. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I could educate you. I could make you a self-governing citizen, but my shareholders really want me to sell you shit. And pardon my French. And so that's what I'm going to do, because that's ultimately how I keep my job. And so when we say critical/cultural, we really mean two different things. When we're talking about a critical theory, and you'll really want to get this down now, the critical theorist believes that because media exists in a consumer capitalist system, its ultimate function is just to dumb people down and narcotize them. In other words, it acts like a drug. The purpose of it is to get people to tune out, to not care, to think only about themselves, and ultimately to keep the machine going. Quarterly profits, annual profits, stock prices, etc. The cultural theory perspective is somewhat more, shall we say, optimistic. That people can understand this, that they can see through it, and that they can actually use media to create their own messages, even those messages that argue back against a capitalist perspective. So in this case, a cultural theorist would be really enthusiastic about LGBT media, feminist media, diversity media, etc. In other words, that media can be used as a way to, to quote NWA, fight the power. Okay? And so, in other words, in both instances, media are integrated within a culture. One view, the critical view, is that it has a dumbing down effect on people. The cultural view is that it actually could have a very positive effect on people if they would only learn to use it to build a better, more just society. So now, the effects model is much more different, and it's very popular in America, or at least Americans universities. Can anyone give me an idea of what we mean by an effects model? Emily, we haven't heard from you for a while. Do we have any idea what an effects model would be about?
Is that like the message effects and the psychological effects?
Yeah, talking about that.
So like a message effect is like how people are affected by the content of the message.
Right.
And then there's like the ownership effects, medium effects.
Okay.
Yeah, all that.
Does the effects model take a position as to whether or not media operate within a consumer capitalistic system, or media are just media and they are here and we need to make sense of them? Got a 50% chance.
You need to make like sense of it.
We need to make sense of it, right? There's nothing special about capitalism, that essentially we're all rational human beings, that media may try to hoodwink us, but ultimately we're smart people and we just have to understand it, and we can make our own decisions because we're rational, right? So the whole point of dismissing the fear-based models of World War I and saying, well, the direct effects models of the 1930s and 40s were a bit oversimplified, we're able to see, for example, in the indirect effects model, this model called the two-step flow, which means that, you know what, media are really, really bad at brainwashing people to do A or B or C. But media are pretty good at, for example, providing information to cultural elites within a community, and the cultural elites tell the rest of the people how they should think and act and behave. So, in other words, let me give you a good example. Did anyone see the news yesterday about Central College cutting their tuition in half? No?
I saw that.
Yeah, you saw that. Does that make you want to transfer? That's saving a lot of money, Emily.
No.
No? Why? Are you rich?
Central sucks.
Huh?
Because Central sucks.
Well, does Central suck because it sucks, or does Central suck because you're from Simpson?
Because I'm from Simpson.
Yeah. Okay. So now what we would do is we would say, you know what, most high school kids who are like juniors or seniors don't pay a whole lot of attention to those messages about how much education costs. But who does?
Parents.
Parents do. Even if the parents aren't paying for it, the parents are paying attention to this. And a lot of times your high school teachers and your counselors are paying attention to this. Central knows this. So they put out a big campaign, advertising, website. They got a lot of positive media coverage yesterday. And you know what? They're not really even talking to high school kids because they know high school kids aren't paying any attention to it. They're talking to the parents, they're talking to the teachers, they're talking to the coaches, they're talking to the counselors. And I can guarantee you that today, after this news was released yesterday, a lot of those teachers, parents, coaches, and counselors were talking to high school seniors and say, hey, you should check out Central because they've just cut their tuition in half. That's a great example of how the two-step flow works. And ultimately, we trust kids, we trust families to make rational decisions. Do you understand how that works? That's the effects module, or pardon me, effects model. Now, let's really quickly ask this question. Why would a critical and cultural model be a popular way to study media in Europe and the effects model be popular in the United States? This requires, by the way, a little bit of understanding of culture and history. What do you think Americans think of the role of the individual? Do Americans think, for the most part, at least nominally, that we're rational people who make right decisions? Or do we think that most of our compatriots are stupid? Maybe you shouldn't answer that.
I think the first one, this is Josh, by the way.
Yeah. Talk
yeah,
about that, Josh, because I think you're right.
Yeah, I think, because I was thinking about your first question about the whole difference between the way the British see things and the way America sees things. Like, if you think about the history of our country, I mean, we left, or the Pilgrims anyways, left, I mean, we left Britain, which was seen as this sort of monarchy, sort of, you know, the government was in charge of everything. We left for religious freedoms. We left for freedom of speech, you know, to all that stuff. People were excited about, you know, exploring the new world, all that stuff. And then we ended up making our own country, declaring independence,
right?
Because we were tired of paying taxes and stuff, but like a bunch of other reasons too.
Right.
But yeah, I would think that, sorry, what was the original question?
Well, the original question is, why do you think that the effects model would be popular in America, and whereas a critical cultural model would be more popular in Europe? And I think you're getting at it, Josh. I mean, the fact is, Americans think about the world completely differently than Europeans do.
Yeah, and even the thing how you're saying, like, it doesn't matter about like the capitalist thing. Like, we made our own system of government. I mean, based off of aspects of the British, but you know, just that fact alone would make, you know, would make you think it wouldn't matter as much to us if it was capitalist or not. So
Americans generally, I think, historically, I'm talking about historically, maybe not in the present minute, but historically, Americans are generally very optimistic people. I mean, we had to be optimistic to toss out the British. We had to be optimistic to build an entire nation from sea to shining sea. And underpinning all of that was people were rational animals who could make their own decisions. And about, you know, what the right things to do were. Europeans, on the other hand, as a result of their history, are huge believers in power and domination, and that ultimately the wealthy and the powerful will dominate the weak and the small. And so a lot of the intellectual debate among Europeans is how media become a tool of the wealthy and the powerful to dominate the poor and the weak. Whereas Americans believe, right, we believe fundamentally to our core that anyone can do anything. And that all we have to do is understand the way that media works so we can kind of put on our baloney detectors and start to debunk it. So it's an important distinction to make that, and I can pretty much guarantee you'll need that on the mini exam. But essentially, a cultural critical model believes that media are an instrument of power at the behest of the most powerful in a culture. The effects model believe that media are powerful, but that we can all understand it, that we can see through it, that we can make good choices, and that we ultimately can make it accountable to what we want it to be. So again, those are completely different intellectual views of what that's about. So, okay, so next one, and we're gonna have to move a little bit more quickly, and maybe I'll have to skip through some of this because I see we only have about 10 minutes left. 4 types of effects mass communication can have. I think Emily was talking about this a minute ago. What do we mean by message effects, medium effects, ownership effects, and active audience effects? One of the things that researchers do working within the effects tradition is talk about, okay, what's the effect of a message, right? So let me give you an example. Trump, when he ran for president, devised a message, make America great again. He's also devised a message called America First. And for his voters and those people who support them, those have been very powerful messages. For those of us who oppose him, those are ridiculous messages. It's like suggesting that America was no longer a great country, or it fails to understand that America First was actually the slogan of the neo-Nazi movement of the late 1930s and 1940s. But what we study is how do those words, those arrangements of letters into words actually have an effect on people? The second one, medium effects. How does the impact of listening to news via your ear in a podcast, let's say, or watching it on television, or seeing it in a newspaper or reading it in a magazine, how does the fact that you're reading it in a different medium impact you? The fact is, the more that you're taking in information from words on a piece of paper, the more that it invites you to rationally evaluate that information. And the more that you listen to it through your ears or watch it through your eyes, the less rationally. We know this. We know this because of decades of research that will show us that is, if you want to speak to people in a rational way, you'll do it with the word. If you want to speak to them emotionally, you'll find other ways to speak to them. Ownership effects. Who owns media? We've talked about, and we will continue to talk about next time, that there are just actually a small number of corporations that control the bulk of the media in the United States, as opposed to 100 or 150 years ago when there was not concentrated ownership, and every medium, every newspaper, magazine, radio station, TV station was owned typically by some kind of a family ownership. What has been the effect of ownership patterns in media on people? And finally, active audiences. And that's the idea that we're not just sheep, we're not just propagandized. We actually take a message and we make sense of it and we use it to talk back to the message. And again, I take you back to MAGA hats, or I take you back to the slogan, America First. Depending on your political point of view, you either think that's a real cool thing or you think it's absolutely deplorable. The words are the same, the intended meaning is the same, but because we're active members of the audience, we interpret it according to our own experiences. So those are the 4 types of messages. We also talk about 8 major theories of mass communication. I'm going to go through these very quickly. I will tell you that I think they're explained very well in the Hansen text, and we'll go through these quickly. First of all, there's a theoretical perspective called the functional analysis, which just looks at the basic functions of media. Surveilling the environment so we know what's going on. Reading arguments so we make sense of what's going on. That's the correlation function. And also the transmission function. This is, we use media to learn about history. I imagine a lot of you today realize that it was the 18th anniversary of 9/11. And some of you in this room right now have no memory of 9/11. You were either not born or just barely born. But I remember like it was yesterday. And I would imagine, Josh, you probably went and fought partly because of 9/11. Yeah. But you know what? There is something about seeing those images of the first plane and the second plane 18 years later that still have a significant impact on us. Imagine if we didn't have those images, if we didn't have those stories, if we just had some dim memory in our past that something terrible happened 18 years ago today. Media clearly are a huge part of that. So that's the functional analysis. We talk about agenda setting function in media. That's the idea that, unlike some people who say that media have this brainwashing propagandistic effect, that media are really not terribly good at telling people what to think. But they are pretty good at telling people what to think about. So the immigration debate, which has raged now for 3 years, really didn't rage that much until Trump came onto the scene. Did it suddenly change when Trump came onto the scene? No, not really. Here's what changed. Trump seemed to get a lot of support, which indicated that a lot of people were interested in the immigration debate, and media started covering it more. And all of a sudden, that issue becomes more important to us. That's the impact of the media there. It tells us what to think about rather than what to think. Uses and gratifications is the idea that we use media to gratify certain needs and desires. So I may watch a romantic film because I have a real need to feel close to my wife and we can cuddle and watch it. I have a need to listen to music at extreme volume to pump me up. I have a need to listen to a podcast to keep my head busy while I'm on my hour and a half or so bike ride when I go on it. These are the needs and gratifications, uses and gratifications. Social learning, the idea that we learn about what we should do in life by watching cues in media. If we see violence in media, we start to think that violence is okay. The original social learning experiment was the psychological experiments of the 1950s and 60s of Albert Bandura that showed if kids saw other kids beating the hell out of a doll, guess what? Suddenly they beat the hell out of the doll too, because they just took the social learning cues that that's what you do to dolls. So we apply that to media. You know, we learn that we have to get our girl a diamond when we want to marry her because that's what she's expecting. Go back and look at engagement photos from 100 years ago. You will not find young women with diamond rings on their finger unless they were really wealthy. Now it's pretty much a given. And largely that's because of marketing and advertising. The spiral of silence. I guess I got these a little out of order. The spiral of silence is the idea that if we sense that our views are in the minority, politically, socially, culturally, largely through media content, we're going to shut up. We're not going to share our views. We don't want to risk social ostracization. If I sense in 2020 that Trump's going to win walking away in a landslide, I'm probably going to keep pretty quiet about it. I don't want people to think I'm a jerk. And so I'm not going to argue against Trump. That's the idea of the spiral of silence. Media messages can pressure dissenting voices into being quiet. Symbolic interactionism. I'm not going to show this to you, mainly because we're almost out of time. But if I flashed a symbol right now on the screen of the Nazi swastika, what would your response be? Or let's say I did it a little more subtle. You'd notice down in the lower right-hand corner, I always put a hashtag, a Twitter hashtag for our course. So let's say instead of having the maple leaf of Simpson and multi-com SC, I just put a hashtag, a swastika down there the whole time. Just a little tiny swastika just down there. Would that have any impact on people?
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, what would that impact be?
You'd be thinking like, why are you putting a Nazi symbol on
right,
this,
what the hell, right?
What's up with that? Yeah.
Right. And of course, the Nazi symbol is a crooked cross, which actually existed long before the Nazis. But when it became identified with Nazis.
Yeah, before wasn't it like a reversal of the Buddhist symbol of?
No, I don't really know the history.
Something, I don't know, something like that.
Sometime. But the point is, it became associated with National Socialism or fascism. But more to the point, it became associated with evil. And if I simply put that down in the lower right-hand corner, you might go to the dean tomorrow and complain, right? But when you think about it in a certain way, look, it's just a graphic representation. I could say that it represents the Oakland Raiders for all I know, okay? But the point is, we reply and react to our world through symbols perpetuated media. Could be the Nazi swastika, could be the American flag, it could be the Christian cross, it could be the Muslim crescent. We respond to those. Media logic, the idea that people who work in media adopt a certain point of view about the world. It is frequently said that people who work in media are liberals, which to a certain extent I would actually agree with people, but most police officers and military people are conservative. And that's because by virtue of working in a given industry, you adopt the values of the other people who work in that industry. And in terms of media, it may impact the way you see the world. And finally, cultivation analysis, which is that media are simply tools by which we cultivate ideas. And the last thing, and I'm sorry we've gone a couple minutes over, but I am going to wrap up here. The last thing we wanted to ask about was the mean world syndrome. What is the mean world syndrome? Quickly.
Isn't it like, this is Shira, isn't it like when how you view the world based on what you watch, and it's kind of like you think that everything around you is evil?
Evil,
like
mean, rotten, dirty. So this is a theory that came up in the 1980s, and it found that the more people watched local television news, as opposed to network news, the more they watched local television news, the more they were fearful about their surroundings, the more racist their views were, the more supportive they were of draconian policies for people who committed crimes. We found out, for example, that people who were heavy viewers of TV news were something like 3 or 4 times more likely to support the death penalty than people who didn't watch a lot of TV news. And the theory being that, media didn't tell you to support the death penalty, but years and years and years of watching the 6 and 10 news pretty much told you that you lived in this mean and ugly place where people need to be dealt with harshly. And so that's the mean world syndrome. So I'm going to skip over tonight. We were going to talk a little bit about what we found out about the J Smooth videos, but we're out of time. We'll come to those another time. So just to recap, you should know something about history and development of media effects, the critical theory model versus cultural critical theory model versus the effects model, 4 types of effects, which we covered quickly, 8 theories, which we covered quickly, and the mean world syndrome. And then, of course, we're all done now with our chat. Make sure, if you haven't already done so, you do your mini exam tomorrow night by midnight, and then move on to Module 4. And the next time we will see you all here is next Monday night at 8 p.m. Sorry, football fans, we'll interfere with Monday Night Football again. So does anyone have any questions for me?
Nope.
All right. Well, that said, I'm going to shut off our recording here.